Hey team, this is Mr. MacT again. It is Tuesday. You have a sub again today, so we're going to run the same drill. Most of you I saw turned in your bronze work and your notes from yesterday. That's great. If you aren't done with those, that is due Wednesday. So that should have been done with your homework, all the bronze problems, as well as your homework assigned yesterday for a 3-3 day 2. If that's not done or you turned it in, you're going to work on that today after you finish today's lesson. So grab it out of the bin if you did turn it in and weren't done, and we'll collect that Wednesday. So you know the drill. If you haven't done the warm-up, go ahead and press pause on the video, get these 3 problems done quietly, and then we'll go over them together. Okay, so go ahead and check number 1. You should have set it equal to 0. If it says solve, it's just asking you to make x by itself. Treat it like an equation, and your roots would be 3/2 and -2. Number 2, you should have set this up with quadratic. You could have possibly set it up with completing the square by moving the 5 over. I just went the quadratic route. Go ahead and talk through this if you need to, but here are the steps. When you get down to step number 4, notice how I simplified 124 and I set up a factor tree and took out a 2. Because 2 appears twice, you can put it outside the square root, and 31 is left on the inside. That simplifies because the 2 can cross cancel, and it leaves you with -6 plus or minus root 31. It should have been D is one of them, and then you have another option, but you just need to choose one for the answer. Number 3 is pretty simple. You could actually do that mentally. Okay, next page, please. Today's aim is students will be able to graph functions. And remember, in this math class, we put the fun in function. Whenever we have functions, we're going to have a fun time. You don't have to laugh. Okay, in your own words, what is the domain of a function? What is the range of a function? Pause the video, jot down your answers, and play it in 30 seconds. Okay, so hopefully you put something like this. The domain are all the possible values of x in your function, and the range are all the possible values of y. If you need to add that to your answer, go ahead and add it now. So we're supposed to be graphing functions today, and you are really good at graphing equations. If you've made it this far in Algebra 1, you can do this first one in your sleep by finding the slope-intercept form. And I want to set the first 2 problems up a little bit simpler and just kind of break down what is happening when you have f of x. So the first column we're going to call x, but the second column we're going to call the function of x. And I'll show you why in just a minute. And we're going to put in some values of x. So in this first example, we're going to add the domain. And they're going to tell us your possible domain is going to be -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So they tell me all the x values that are possible to put into this function. And if you saw this on a test, you could do that really easily. You find the y-intercept and you graph the slope. And we can basically do the same thing later on in your bronze work. I'll let you do the slope-intercept form. But for some harder functions you'll get later on, we're just going to learn how to make a table and graph it. So when you have the function of -2, you can simply plug in the -2 in for x, and it's going to replace the function x and the x in the actual function to the right. And you should get -6 minus 5, so the function of -2 is -11. And now let's graph that point, -2. Notice they're counting by 2's, and it's going to be somewhere down here. 8, 10, 11, we'll mark right there. negative 11. Okay, so what about the function of negative 1? Okay, that looks like it's going to be negative 8. So let's go over 1, down 8. And the function of 0 is going to be negative 5. Remember, it goes from 4 to negative 6, so we're going to put it right there. Oh, and I made a blunder. I put negative 1 where the negative 2 should be. So negative 2 is here, negative 1 should be here. So we're going to go negative 1, negative 8. That looks a little better. Don't get thrown off by them counting by 2. And we'll do the function of 1. And that's going to be 3 minus 5, or negative 2. So 1, negative 2. And lastly, the function of 2 is going to be 3 times 2 minus 5. So that's a negative, or that's a positive 1. 6 minus 5 is 1. So let's go over to up 1, and we're going to make our line. And there's your function. The function is just like an equation. It just has an f of x. And you can see kind of why they make functions in algebra, because you can really see exactly when the points cross the x value, they come out as some y value. So those are all of our x values, and they come out to a y value over here. And we'll end this with a 1. So simple, you will never have to set up a table with this simple of a function, but you will have to set up a table later on when you have some pretty tricky functions you cannot use the slope-intercept formula for. So example 2, let's go ahead and, this is actually an equation, so let's just graph this one. I'll give you maybe a minute to graph it using the slope-intercept form. What's the y-intercept? What is the slope? Pause it if you need to, but you should have written negative 2 down here. And then up 7 over 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4. It's a positive slope, and it looks like that. So you can see equations and functions, they act the same way. We could have made a table for that one, but we didn't need to. All right, last part of this one. If you have one that is not in slope-intercept form, we can just move everything over, and your goal will be to try to get y by itself. So let's take the negative 2x, and I'm doing the inverse of the positive 2 to move it over. That gives me negative 3y equals negative 2x minus 6, and you can divide by negative 3. So you have y by itself, you get y equals 2/3 x plus 2. And once again, this is just a simple equation. I don't need to set up a table, so let's just put 2 as your y-intercept and go up 2. It's counting by 2's again, so don't be tricked. Up 2 over 3 over 1, 2, 3. Up 2 over 1, 2, 3. And once you have 3 points or so, you can graph it. Okay, so what if you have a quadratic? A quadratic is anything in the form of x being squared. So it's not a plain x, we are going to graph the quadratic. And you know how to graph these using the quadratic form, not the quadratic formula. Don't be so negative b, get over 2a, pick your 2 points. We're just going to see if we can graph this simple one using a table. So let's do x and y, and we're going to graph for the domain of -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So let's put that in our x value. And when this is negative 2, it's going to be squared, and negative 2 times negative 2 is 4. So you go negative 2 and up 4. Negative 1 squared is negative 1 times negative 1, which is just 1. Over negative 1 and up 1. And 0 squared will be 0. So your parabola is 0, 0, and 1. Squared is 1. 2 squared is 4. So it's going to look like the parent function over 1 up 1, over 2 up 4. And the parent function of your parabola should look something like that. Okay, so you can do that with a table. You also know how to graph it, finding the vertex, finding the axis of symmetry, and then 2 points. You'll use both in today's lesson. Your turn, go ahead and graph this one using a table. Pause it if you need to. Okay, so you should have had something that looks like this. This is the parent function only negative, and remember a negative parabola will always face downwards. Okay, flip your page, please. Okay, so you're going to graph these, and you're going to grab another piece of paper so you have enough room to work. When you have just a equation that is in y equals mx plus b form, like 1 or 2, you have to change 3 to get y by itself, you can simply just graph that using slope-intercept form. When you have functions that look more like this, and they have an x squared, that's going to be a parabola. I want you to solve it in this method. Let me grab a piece of scratch paper. And whenever you see x squared, you're going to grab your paper and do this process. We'll do this one together, and then I'll let you go to your partner practice. So remember, when they give you a domain range, this is the values of x that they want you to use. So it's kind of nice they give you what the points you're going to have for x are. This is all the domains that you'll use. And so the first thing we're going to do is find your axis or your vertex, and then your axis of symmetry. So remember, don't be so negative b, get over 2a. There's no b values, so it's negative 0 over 2 times 1. That's going to be 0 over 2, which is just 0. So we're going to plug that in, and we get 0 squared minus 3. So our y is negative 3. Your vertex will end up being 0, negative 3. 0. Don't be tricked by these counting by 2's. It's going to go right in the middle. Okay, so now that you have the vertex, you're going to pick one point, and they give you values of x to use. So I'm going to use the 1 first. So when x is equal to 1, let's draw in our line of symmetry. And when x is equal to 1, what happens? Well, you plug that in, so that's going to be y equals 1 squared minus 3, which equals 1 minus 3, which is negative 2. So our first point is 1, comma, negative 2. Go over 1, go down 2. And I can make another point by reflecting across the axis of symmetry. Over 1, over 1. Great. Okay, last step is just to find another point. So we're going to use 2 this time, because I know if I reflect across, it'll be negative 2, and I want to work in positive numbers. So what happens when x is 2? The y value is going to become 4 minus 3, which is 1. So this one looks like it is going to be 2 comma 1. Okay, go over 2, go up 1. Remember, we're counting by 2's. Go over 2, go up 1. All right, there is our finished parabola. Connect the dots, and you're on to problem number 1. Today is a little bit of a fluency day, so go slow enough to where you're not making blunders on these. You do not need to make a table. Kind of big idea taking away from this note session is the table is there to see kind of what's happening with the function, but you do not need to draw that. So you should have all this knowledge, being able to make the parabola when you need to, and then also your equation in slope-intercept form when you need to. So that is the way the cookie crumbles, guys. You should be on to bronze. Finish that, then grab a homework page. If you're finished with the bronze today, but you didn't finish bronze yesterday, go back to the bin, grab the bronze from yesterday, and you need to finish that by Wednesday. All right, have fun.